Let's start with the latest. A column of armored vehicles flying Russian flags driving into the eastern Ukrainian city of Sliovansk. This, as our correspondent elsewhere was telling us about standoffs between separatists and those government forces. Celestine Bullen, we're 24 hours in to Kiev's big push to retake eastern Ukraine. It's not going the way the government wanted.
No, I mean, and I think, they were obviously caught between a rock and a hard place right from the beginning. I mean, if they were to use too much force and it turned bloody, that would be bad in and of itself, but diplomatically it would put them in a very bad starting position for the talks that are supposed to start tomorrow. But on the other hand, this is also terrible because they look like they are ineffective, can't control the country, and if there was no confidence in them in the East before, because they distrusted them. Now there's no confidence in them because they're not very effective. So it was a very tough position for them to be in, and
a lose-lose situation. What can Kiev do?
Well, I don't think they can. They can negotiate. I think that's the only way out of this crisis. They should negotiate, because any attempt at military solution will only worsen the situation.
And negotiate with who?
Well, they should negotiate with Russia, and they should negotiate with the local representatives of those forces who are pushing for greater independence, federalization, and so on and so forth. So.
Well, what's interesting here is that there's more and more of them as the days go on. There's last week it was in 3 places. This week it's in a dozen. So again, it's sort of patchy, and it's willy-nilly finding who to negotiate with.
Well, I'm sure they can find people in the city of Donetsk. There are, they created the so-called Donetsk Republic, and there are people who are running that structure. And I'm sure, I'm sure if they want to negotiate, they can try to find ways. And first of all, they should also be talking to Moscow, and I'm sure they try to do that as well.
Can I say a few words here?
Dmitry Babich.
Well, first I would like to clarify something. When you said that several armored personnel carriers with Russian flags entered Kramatorsk, a lot of people might think that this is the Russian army entering Kramatorsk. No, these are Ukrainian forces which refused to shoot the people in Kramatorsk and which switched to the side of the protesters there. And, a lot of people in Russia received this news with great happiness because
according to that's not the version given to the Associated Press, saying that there were 5 tanks that were actually confiscated by the separatists.
Well, you can imagine how you can confiscate a tank if the crew is determined to fight, if there are helicopters flying over it, if the Ukrainian government declared a special operation with the army participating. It's quite clear that the Ukrainian army doesn't want to fight the people in the east of Ukraine. First, a lot of people in the Ukrainian army are from the east, so they have the same feelings and they don't want to shoot these protesters. Second, when the Western media says that this is all organized by Russia, these are all Russian agents, I think it's an exaggeration, to put it mildly, because even on the videos you see that a lot of these protesters are civilians, at least the huge majority of them are civilians. And I understand why they protest, because just recently the president whom they elected, Yanukovych, had about 80, sometimes 90% of support in the eastern regions. One of the towns that you just mentioned where the rebellion is the strongest is his native town, Yanakievo. So they saw him evicted from power without any impeachment, basically just by a group of protesters. And when these protesters in Kiev were burning the policemen alive with Molotov cocktails, when they were occupying administrative buildings, the West said that you can't use the army against them. Don't use violence against peaceful protesters. And now, when the new government is trying to use the army against the protesters in the East, the West is silent, and the West says this is the right way to go. This is the reason why people in the East are so angry, and this is the reason why the army is not prepared to act.
Well, the White House spokesman, by the way, on Tuesday saying that he was congratulating Ukraine for its measured response so
Right.
far. But actually, Dmitry Babich making a point that was made by our correspondent. She was on the outskirts of one of those towns. She witnessed that standoff with the tanks. She said she saw no Russians there.
Right.
And
I mean, I think that, like always, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and it's getting lost, which is the sort of the really sad thing. I mean, first of all, to some of the points that Mr. Babich raised, I would say, yes, they voted for Mr. Yanukovych, but I don't hear any support from any of those people for Mr. Yanukovych today. I mean, I think that some of the complaints in the East are the same as they were in the West, which is that this is a corrupt and government that was not necessarily working for the people. I mean, seriously, I haven't heard one person say, "Where is our president? Bring him back." Second of all, when you say that they were stopping these, the tanks got taken over so that the soldiers wouldn't shoot, I think precisely that is incorrect. I mean, they've not been shooting. The West has been urging them not to shoot. There was, by the way, shooting in Kiev, but let's just leave that aside. And I think, that it is a very difficult situation to how to sort of impose control over a country, in a case like this, where you are literally...
And to the point that Dmitry Babich addressed, which is saying we're overplaying the fact that Russia is stirring up trouble?
I'm not there. I'm not there. I think that there's plenty of grievance on the ground about being ignored in the last 2 months.
Anton Kozlov?
Well, I think certainly Russians do pull some strings there, no doubt about that. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Eurasian youth movement, which is fairly close to the Kremlin, someone like Alexander Dugin giving instructions to the people in the east of Ukraine. So for sure, I mean, I don't think it's a full-blown invasion of Ukraine, clearly not. But I mean, the fact that they are trying to pull strings, I would say it's normal given the geostrategic and geopolitical situation today. So, I mean, the United States were doing exactly the same thing in Central and South America for ages, for decades and centuries. So why all of a sudden this had become something of a scandal?
All right, reactions coming in. One from Edward on Twitter. The best solution is for Ukraine to be divided into east and west sections and recognized as separate countries. We'll address the point of what is up next for Ukraine in a moment. But on the issue first of strings being pulled, when Russia's prime minister spoke of Ukraine as a nation on the brink of civil war Tuesday, the UN Human Rights Commission directly accused Moscow of fomenting trouble.
Everyone who says that Ukraine needs help should actually do something for Ukraine. I'm talking about our European partners and our partners across the ocean. They should at least spare $1. They give out endless promises. We would provide Ukraine with $1 billion. We would send $5 billion. They have to give something first. We gave $3 billion. They didn't even give a ruble, not even a cent.
All right, there you heard Dmitry Medvedev talking about what the West should be doing at this point. But first, on this issue of pulling strings or not pulling strings, it was an accusation, by the way, Dmitry Babich, that was echoed on Tuesday by the UK Foreign Secretary, saying that Moscow is fomenting trouble in the east of Ukraine.
I just think that accusing each other is pretty pointless. I think that the Western politicians are now making the same exaggeration that some media in Moscow made during the Maidan protests, saying that, oh, these protests are not genuine, they're all fomented by the West. In the same way, it would be a mistake to say that there are no real demonstrators in eastern Ukraine. This is all created by the Russian special services. And certainly you can't believe the Kiev government when they call all of these protesting people terrorists, and when they say that Russia is involved in in a terrorist attack against Ukraine. In general, this kind of language, I think, doesn't serve the good cause in this situation. But I think that Medvedev raised an interesting point. The reason why Russia is going to participate in this meeting on April 17th is because Ukraine is really on the brink. And we can help it together, the EU, Russia, and the United States. But although technically it is possible, I'm afraid politically it is impossible, because both sides, the West and Russia, don't trust a word of what the other side is saying. And that's just so terrible. In this situation, the solution that was offered by our viewer to just divide Ukraine, I think it's sort of too radical, because why don't we try federalization of Ukraine? This is something that these protesters in the East are demanding. This is the demand that Russia supports. Indeed, I think in Kiev we saw that Ukraine is badly divided. The picture of events offered by the Western media, that it was all Ukrainians against the corrupt government, is simply wrong. I agree with Celestin Bolin that Yanukovych is not popular now, but corrupt as he was a president of compromise. He tried to speak to all Ukrainians, including the West. And the new government doesn't have a single representative of the East. It only represents the West and the center of Ukraine. And this is precisely the reason why people in the East went to the streets. They can't get their voices heard otherwise. And they want federalization, because now that Crimea is not a part of Ukraine, they have lost electoral clout. Now the West and the center outnumber in terms of votes the East. And Crimea used to belong to the East and to support the pro-Eastern candidates like Yanukovych or Kuchma, who claimed to be pro-Eastern but who became pro-Western when he came to power.
All right, a lot of comments coming in and a lot of food for thought what you said, Dmitry Babich. Let's address one of those points here. One of the viewers saying the EU keeps feeding money to Putin by buying Russian gas. That money's now being spent on a war against Ukraine. Michael Brett, when you look at all of this, they say follow the money, right? How much of this do you really think is about money?
Well, we're not there, and we're certainly not in Putin's mind, so it's hard to say. But there are definitely economic and financial drivers for the actions of the various participants. And one of the strings that Russia has pulled in the recent days is one of the price of gas. So the price of gas asked to Ukraine has almost doubled recently because of arguably good reasons. First, the rebate for renting the military base in Crimea is no longer any justification, and the second one is about the transit of the Ukrainian through the Ukrainian transit capacity for Russian gas to go to Europe. One thing which is very often overlooked is that Ukraine is soon not going to be needed by Russia or Europe to trade gas. Already, Russia...
After 2009, they started building pipelines elsewhere.
Exactly. So the pipeline going directly from Russia to Germany through the Baltic Sea allows already Russia to export almost 80% of its gas, avoiding Ukraine's transit. It's not yet the case, but Russia could do that. And if the Southern Stream, which goes through the Black Sea, which is planned to go through the Black Sea, is actually built, then the needs for Russia to use the Ukrainian transit capacity will be null. So basically, the only need for Russia to be able to send its gas to
but those pipelines
Europe,
flow west. Will it be business as usual?
Well, that all depends on Europe's reaction, obviously, and one thing which is quite sure is that the blocking the exports of hydrocarbons is going to be the last resort tool of European Union because of the very high price it would pay for that. In that case, it would mean recession for Germany, probably for other European countries in Central Europe.
On Tuesday, a Russian power company started sending gas in reverse to Ukraine, a symbolic amount. But Anton Kozlov, again, it's not just money that drives this issue, is it?
Well, I think I would argue that in any conflict, the bottom line is money. But that's
Any conflict.
basically any conflict you go historically and geographically. But that's my view. I think that certainly Russia may suffer from economic sanctions if Europe and the United States will follow on their threats, for sure. Russian economy is vulnerable. Russian economy is export dependent in many ways. But frankly, I don't think that we are at that stage when those economic sanctions that Europe is threatening to impose are going to be that far-reaching. I mean, Ukraine and Russia are not in a state of war. There are no Russian troops in Ukraine at this point. I mean, there's certainly some groups maybe, but I mean, those are allegations. But let's wait and see.
All right, lots of points being brought up here. What happens? What's the way forward for Ukraine? What's the way forward for Russia? We have a comment from Olivier, who says Putin seems deeply concerned about the rights of Russian speakers everywhere except in Russia. How much of an impact on Russia is all this having? We'll put it to our panel when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.